Okay, welcome back to the Woven Energy Podcast with me, Joseph Sikora, and Damon Smith. And we're here once again to talk about shamanism from the ground up. And today is this episode's a bit of a special one because this is our 30th episode. Feels like a bit of an anniversary. I mean, it's been a while since we started. When did we start, Damon? Was it about late 2016, something like that?
Ages ago, yeah.
Ages and ages ago. So we've been going a while now. 30th episode, and I thought we could do something a bit special. So we haven't done a practical episode for a while. So for this episode, we're going to go and venture into more practical technique and try and get you doing something. So the idea is to explore smell. It's one that you don't really hear about very often with shamanism, but you mentioned it on an episode, a few episodes back, when I believe you were talking about the drum. I think it was the Buching Henrik episode, and you were talking about shamanism and smell and how it's a direct link to the limbic system. So I'm really excited about this. You haven't talked to me about this before, so let's see where we go with it. Yeah. Do you want to introduce it a little bit?
Sure. So, I mean, that's a good point to start. We've already covered Buching Henrik as a technique, and we've also said that, and also we're kind of moving into the sort of level 3, the stage 3 area of shamanism on the stage we've got to. We've been trying to introduce shamanism methodically on the podcast, sort of step by step. And it's a very, very hard thing to do because shamanism doesn't really have steps. But I guess, we said that Shalicity is about putting yourself in a good place where you can start to learn from nature. That's kind of level 1, if you like. Level 2 is starting to understand nature through understanding your body and how it works. And then level 3 is how you take that a stage further and you start interacting with what's outside of you, and or you start preparing to interact with what's outside of you. So we've said that there are many level 3 techniques, and we're going to be doing an awful lot about spirit dance on this podcast, and on the Grove, which is this sort of online video and various other things, video resource and notes resource, and I also thinking about putting some commentaries on the Woven Energy podcast. One of the things that happens when we do these podcast episodes is afterwards I spent ages thinking, I should have said this and I should have said that. Almost every episode.
Meanwhile, everybody listening is going, how much did you say? Blew it.
I could have probably done a whole other, each podcast about an hour. I could have done a whole other hour on each individual podcast and all the things I should have said. And
you mentioned that yesterday because it was only yesterday when we recorded the last episode, and you mentioned we could have talked about what was it? Richard Dawkins.
Yeah,
you missed him out completely.
We've got to do another atheism episode for sure. Yeah, there was loads of stuff.
I really enjoyed that one. It was a good episode.
Yeah, I'm a fan of Richard Dawkins, to be honest. Big fan of the guy. So that would be an interesting topic to discuss. A lot of his ideas and others in that field. Yeah, so what I was saying was, we're going to be talking about Bobichig, spirit dance. I sometimes use the word Sam. When we come into talking about Mongolian Buddhism, you'll see why I've got these two different words. I normally there's a million different words in Mongol for any one of these things, but for these two words are the ones I tend to use for spirit dance, and I don't come down on one specific word, and you'll see why very clearly when we've done the episode on Mongolian Buddhism in particular.
So we're putting a pin in that one as well, then, are we?
Yeah, there's another one for you. I think we already had a pin in that to a certain extent, because you remember we said when we did the Buddhism episode, that was a precursor to doing the Mongolian Buddhism episode. That was the,
I'm going to write that down now.
Yeah. So anyway, unfortunately, we're going to talk about another technique today, which is a level 3 technique called Shilshich. And I'm sorry, it's Mongol, yeah? So, it's not hard to pronounce. Shilshich, something like that, and it has to do with smell. And like I said, we already use smell to a certain extent to link us into the membrane in the Buching Henrik technique. Smell is incredibly important in shamanism.
So just to clarify here, you're saying this episode we're talking about stage 3 technique, but
not spirit dance.
It's not spirit dance, but it could be linked into stage 2 as well, if we're using it.
Well, there's no question about could be. Remember what we've said, all stage 3 techniques are stage 2 techniques.
Okay.
But not, no, put it another way around is, stage 2 is involved in all stage 3 techniques. Yeah?
Yeah.
But stage 3 is not necessarily involved in all stage 2 techniques.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we've said it that way before. Each level of the pagoda, if you like, embraces the one before it. I probably should have called it pagoda because it sounds like something to do with Buddhism or something, you know. But anyway, so we're going to talk about this technique, shilshik, which is related to an even more difficult to pronounce Mongol word that I even have difficulty with, but I'm going to give you a go. Onelach, yeah. It's something like that. Yeah, I just never got that one. But this is, I guess it's about, again, when we said amskar means the breath, but it doesn't mean breath. It means something more than breath. Yeah.
Yeah.
When oneldach, it's not 2 words. It's 1 word. I'm just having 2 goes at pronouncing it. It's maybe O's kind of sound on the start. It's a really, really difficult one, and they say it so fast. You wouldn't believe. Just talking about the Mongol language for a minute. One of the problems is, you learn Mongol. I learned it literally in a classroom. My Mongol teacher, Mongol native teachers, I was blessed to have, and I learned it literally in the classroom. Every day I'm sat in this classroom with Mongol people teaching me Mongol, which was fantastic. But then so I thought, I've learned Mongol, and I can start to hold a conversation with them. And then you hear 2 Mongol people talking to each other, and it's like,
just a sneeze.
They're talking so fast.
Just sneeze at each other.
What has that got to do with what you're teaching me? That was how I felt. But it does. It's just the same stuff said really, really fast. But in the speed of how they say things, it's very, very difficult to get the subtlety of it. It's in Damon's, if I was to try and spell that word, it would be like Ooneldekh and Oonerlekh, and sort of halfway between those 2 spellings. But anyway, that's the kind of broad subject area that we're talking about. It's not a word for level 3. It's a word for smell, but at a level 3 kind of context. In the same way that amska means more than breath, that means more than smell. And the technique is called shilshik, which is a bit easier to pronounce.
Can I ask you before you move on? When we talk about smell, are there specific? Can it be any sort of smell that we can link into, or are there specific smells related to certain techniques or certain outcomes or anything like that?
It doesn't really work like that, Matt. What we're trying to get. Okay, let's talk about how smell works a little bit. We I think, as we said in the Booking Hengvig episode, smell is linked straight into your brain. It's straight into the limbic system. Yeah, it has a literal direct nerve link into your limbic system. As we've said before, the limbic system deals with what we call the top line, the spirit, the creative realm.
Yeah.
It's the only sense that goes that way. All of the others go through other parts of the brain that are involved in higher levels of processing. And so if you compare it or contrast it to vision, vision goes through your vision. Vision is only a 2-stroke 3-dimensional thing, isn't it? We have binocular vision, so we have 3-dimensional, we have depth perception in our vision. And we effectively have 3 dimensions. And then within that, there's a spectrum of light, isn't there? It goes from, it goes from the sort of reds at one end up to the violets at the other end.
Yeah.
But it's a progression. It's a linear progression, Now, so we've got a 3-dimensional space with a linear progression. Now, a lot of work obviously has been done on the anatomy of smell in biology. And, just the chemicals involved, they're not linear. There's just for flowers, flowers smell nice. Everybody likes the smell of flowers. I love the smell of flowers. If I see flowers, that's it. I'm away for at least an hour. But people love that smell. And there's lots of chemicals involved in that, like linalool and various other quite famous chemicals like that. That's, incidentally, that particular chemical is used in bathroom products and in detergents, and it's been shown in the lab to reduce stress. But it's only one of getting on for like 2,000 chemicals that are involved in floral scents. And those chemicals they're complex chemicals, they're proteins and various other things, various acids and that kind of stuff, that very, very complex chemistry. And it's not linear like vision is. It's not a linear series of colors. And it doesn't exist in a three-dimensional space. The way that the brain works around those sort of processing those chemicals, it has quite sophisticated mechanisms for how it deals with those chemicals. And it actually, if you were to try, I know it's a difficult thing to do, to try and conceptualize it in the same way that sight is, because it's a very, very different kind of smell. Sorry, a very, very different kind of way of dealing with it. But if you were to try to draw an analogy, if you think of vision existing in a three-dimensional space, smell exists in a 400-dimensional space. And you can't therefore you can't visualize smell. And of course, we don't try to. I mean, as baseline obsessed creatures, smells it's probably the single sense that we deal with in the most simplistic way possible. It's stuff like, I really, really like the smell of that, or I really, really don't like the smell of that.
There must be a biological reason for it, like detecting poisons or detecting things.
Absolutely.
Because it's always struck me as strange how smell is like, I see some people that can detect such minute little changes in smell.
Exactly.
And they've trained their sense of smell so much. And it's always struck me as odd.
You're absolutely right.
We don't do that.
It is the reason for it. And we said, in one sense, chelicity is that link into the environment. It's the animal's link into its natural world. Well, here's an actually specific example of that. Some plants, some trees are subject to insect attacks. And actually, very recently, I went to one of these stately homes that had some nice gardens, and this particular person I think it was one of these guys who'd been through the Industrial Revolution, and he got wealth, and then he tried to sort of buy his way into the aristocracy by carefully selected marriages and building a big country house and all this sort of stuff. But he collected trees and plants from all over the world, and so there's this wonderful, from a shaman's point of view, this wonderful atmosphere there, just all these exotic senses, all these exotic, in scientific terms, chemicals that are flying around in the air there from a smell point of view. Wonderful, just wonderful. And here's a specific example. As I was walking through that place, I saw a specific kind of tree. It piqued my interest because I didn't know what it was. But it was obviously from some exotic place. And I had a look closer, and the leaves were like lace that'd been totally eaten through by insects. And so I went along a bit further, and there was another one of these trees, and it was totally fine. A few little insect holes in it, but it was totally fine. And you might think it's the same kind of tree. And so you might think, well, the insects practically ate that tree to bits. Why is this tree not got insect holes in it? When they weren't that far apart, less than 100 meters, And there's a reason for that. When insects attack a tree or a plant, the tree produces chemical signals that are released into the air. The other trees, especially the trees of similar species, they pick up on those signals, those chemical signals, and they start producing toxins as quickly as they can because they know there's an insect infestation, and they start producing toxins in their leaves that will specifically target that type of insect and prevent it from eating the leaves. And I saw this had actually happened in this thing. So those chemicals, what you don't see when you're walking through a wood or a park or forest is these chemicals are in the air all the time. As I've said, just in terms of flower scents, there's 2,000 different chemicals. Well, you think in terms of all the smells in the whole world, when there's 2,000 different chemicals in this one tiny little niche, but here's the clever thing. That's a kind of talk that's going on. This is like Dr. Dolittle talking to the animals, talking to the plants. This is really talking to the animals, really talking to plants. If you can pick up on that stuff, then you can have serious advantages. And there is a kind of animal in those environments that does pick up on that stuff. It has learned how to read, if you like, how to read tree smell language, and that is insectivorous birds. Insectivorous birds pick up on those signals. They know there are insects in the area, and they fly in, and they come and they consume the insects, thus further protecting the trees. So now the tree isn't just releasing the chemical signals in order to get other trees to release toxins to make the leaves unpalatable to the insects. It's now releasing them both for that and to bring in the heavy cavalry. The insectivorous birds are going to come and eat those insects and stop them attacking the leaves. Do you follow what I mean?
Yeah.
And so this is where you get this kind of idea of Gaia, this idea of the world being just this amazing, holistic, the whole world, the whole natural environment as being one creature. Like I don't know if we talked about the legend of Pangu in China.
I don't think so.
Yeah, so effectively, cut a long story short, in Chinese mythology, there's this deity Pangu or Panku, depending on which part of China you're from, and he his body kind of in the legend, his body sprouted into the world. The blood running in his veins became the rivers and the seas. His hair became the trees, his toes and fingers became and all this kind of stuff, His eyes became the sun and the moon. And effectively what it's saying is that the world is one being. It's the Gaia hypothesis. It's the world is one single living organism. And although we are conditioned ourselves to see all these differences between things, as a matter of fact, everything's not as different as it seems from a shaman's point of view. As you progress with shamanism, you can come to see that things aren't as separate as you thought they were. And you can see other examples of that gradually. Science is sort of catching up with shamanism in many areas. One of them is, if you think of science a few hundred years ago, if you have an empty vessel or a vessel and you suck all the air out of it, you have a vacuum inside that vessel. That vessel is empty. Now, with modern understanding, guys like Paul Dirac and these modern scientists who can think about things in terms of very high levels of mathematics and sort of figure stuff out on the basis of mathematics. Those guys kind of came to realize that space in there is not empty. It's very, very far from it. And this is, and Richard Feynman and these kind of guys, they realized in the end that space was far from empty. Nothing is empty in this universe. And they discovered antimatter, which is an yin and yang. It's an old shamanic intuition. You've got matter's just energy, or everything's energy, and energy can have a positive or a negative flavor. So matter is energy, therefore So one of the things I've been encouraged about modern physics in particular is gradually as it goes on, it tends to confirm shamanic intuitions. And it's not surprising because what those physicists doing, they're looking at nature. They're doing it, I think, like we said on one of the sessions we did recently, where they're looking at it as an observer, not participating in it, but they're looking at the same thing that shamans are looking at. It's nature, it's the natural world. So is it surprising that they're coming up with similar kind of answers? Although that the relative importance that they would place on those answers compared to the relative importance a shaman might place on those answers, the emphasis is very, very different. But the kind of the general perception of what's going on there is the same. I don't know how much people know about the matter-antimatter idea, but the general idea is that there's a lot of matter and antimatter in the universe, but it doesn't last very long because matter and antimatter annihilate each other. And these things are appearing in empty space and disappearing lightning fast. And then for whatever reason, at some point in time in the dim and distant past, there's been an imbalance somewhere, and that's how we've ended up with the predominance of matter rather than antimatter on our Earth. But that kind of thing, if you say that kind of thing to a shaman, I watched a few documentaries on this kind of subject, and also a friend of ours, John, is also a physicist, so I've had some talk to him about this kind of subject. those sort of notions, they're not surprising in any way to people who study shamanism. They're really, really not surprising. Because this just sort of fit in with the whole picture. So it's the interconnectedness is very, very important at level 3, level 4, and level 5 of shamanism. That interconnectedness is the basis of those 3 levels. And this is one of the great things with smell, is that it's not linear. And therefore, it forces you into this interconnectedness. It's a great thing for connecting you. There's 2 things there. One is it's directly connected to your limbic system. It's a direct connection into your top line, if you want to put it in that kind of way, or into the creative realm. It doesn't. I mean, there are sensory information does also find its way up to the higher centers of the brain. It goes through the olfactory cortex, goes through the thalamus, the neocortex, to higher centers within the brain. But there is this direct link. There's like limbic system, hypothalamus, pituitary. Well, if you understand anything about biology, that means things you smell can affect the hormones and chemicals that are in your blood directly. Doesn't matter what your brain says about it. Yeah.
I got to tell you, when I was doing my physics degree, there was this little study room. It was. It was pretty small and pretty closed off. And doing a physics degree, you end up with lots of sweaty people. And this one guy had long hair, he did, and it was like, it stunk to high heaven. You'd walk into the study room and just him would be in it, and immediately you'd smell and you'd go, oh my God. And it would be an instant reaction. And exactly. So I'm thinking, and that did elicit a big emotion in me, even though it was just a smell. I was like, I just had to go. It was awful. But so smell can elicit emotions as well. And is that something to do with linking into and it's a direct emotion as well. It's like, boom, and it's straight on you. Is that something to do with it linking directly into the limbic system?
Yes, absolutely. It does. It affects you, and there's nothing you can do about it. Yeah, well, there
absolutely
is
nothing. There's nothing this guy could do about it.
There is something you can do about your reaction to it. Your strategy in terms of if you've got Titanic bat, you can overcome your natural adverse reaction. But there's nothing you can stop to stop yourself having that adverse reaction. I mean, you think it's bad for people. Imagine if you're a dog. It's just if people, in your nose. I mean, we have quite good sense of smell. Actually, we don't tend to focus on it. We don't think about it. It's a very subconscious thing for us. And I think because it doesn't fit very well with our miasma, it doesn't fit very well with this way that we have of looking at this world, this kind of logical way. You can't be logical about smell. It's just like not possible, it goes straight.
Which is
into your
probably
limbic
why
system.
we don't concentrate on it.
Yeah, we don't like it.
We don't train it.
But actually, our sense of smell is pretty good, relatively speaking, to some other animals. I mean, compared to dogs, people talk about the sense of smell of dogs. Dogs are really exception rather than a rule. They're phenomenal smellers, if you like,
They don't categorise things, though, can they? Because they could go out into the garden and sniff shit all day long and they're fine.
Yeah, but the thing is, they're not just smelling one thing. As I said, with floral scents, there's 2,000 different chemicals. There's probably also an equivalent kind of amount, Yeah. But, think about this. That sense of smell that overwhelmed you in your nose, Joe, you have about 5 million chemical receptors in your nose, yeah? Your dog has about 300 million receptors in its nose. Yeah. So you imagine the poor soul, being a dog walking into that room, You know what I'm saying? And you can see that dogs interact with each other through smell in a big way, don't they? Yeah. And it's almost like vision to them. It says, you see you're in the playground and some kid bullied you last week. Because we're very visual, we've been trained to be very visual, you remember that kid through vision. But a dog doesn't necessarily remember that the other dog that bullied it last week through vision. It remembers it through smell. It has a signature of that dog through its smell. And that's why they do this sniffing. When they meet you for the first time, they come and sniff you because who are you? They're trying to identify you in the same way. But,
a friend had a dog that just came and just wouldn't leave anybody's crotch alone. Just moving things around and getting a right good sniff.
Yeah, but we criticize dogs for that. But let me tell you about an experiment that's conducted. I think this thing's on the internet somewhere. I don't know where. But anyway, it went something like this. I don't know too much of the details, but it was one of these scientific experiments, They got a bunch of test subjects, and they asked them to sit in a room, and somebody would come into the room and shake hands with them, say hello and leave. And then somebody else would come into the room, shake hands with them, say hello and leave. Somebody else would come into the room, shake hands with them, say hello and leave. And this was the experiment. That's pretty much all the subjects were told about the experiment. And they had cameras on them. They did this over and over again. It doesn't take very long, does it? You shake hands, you say hello, and the person leaves. And they were looking at their body language and stuff as they were doing this. And what they found was that an unexpectedly large number of the subjects unconsciously sniffed their hands once the person left the room. Not thinking, oh, I'm going to sniff my hand, but just almost like took their hand up to their nose, and the hand that they'd shook hands with always, up their nose and maybe scratch their nose or just, touch their face or something like that, so that the palm of the hand would be towards their nose. And what's actually happening there is they are sniffing the person they've just shaken hands with in the same way their dog does. It's not conscious. They're not thinking, ooh, they've shaken hands with this person, I'm going to sniff my hand. They'd probably, if you told them that, they'd probably go, ooh, or something like that,
That's fascinating.
But it is very fascinating, isn't it? And so not only dogs do that.
Do you know what? It's often, it gets me thinking, particularly since starting all this stuff, how many of those biological sort of wirings do we have inside us as humans that we simply just ignore? Or, well, we don't ignore, that's the point. We just don't know about, that are there at play in the background, and we just sort of stifle them.
Yeah, and absolutely. And you've got to think of it as we say language isn't very good for talking about shamanism. Well, there's different kind of languages. These sort of chemical languages are great for talking about shamanism, specifically because they're plugged straight into the creative realm, into Tengar, into the upper world. But they're plugged straight into that place. So obviously these things are fantastic. And where I've been warning people about using visualization early on, and I'm not saying it's visualization and visual imagination can't be used as shamanistic techniques. Sure, they can, yeah. But they're strongly tied to that processing stuff that we do. We use visualization in order to create our tools. We create tools in our minds, and then we create them in reality. But then, of course, we can create other things in our minds and think they have a reality. That aren't true, that aren't real, and have nothing to do with the real world. And so, but with smell, it's very different. So here I'm going to start doing the exact opposite of what I've done with visualization from the outset of the Woven Energy podcast. I'm going to encourage everybody listening to this podcast to start using their sense of smell a lot more than they do. And so one of the things that we want to do as shamans, and one of the things, if you remember quite a few times, I think on the previous podcasts, I've encouraged people to go out into the natural world and find a place where there is nothing, no sight or sounds or indeed smells of anything that's human constructed. It's quite hard for some people. It's easier for other people. But I want people to go and do that because that's a place where you can start to pick up on, practice your chillicity there. I've said, well, you can start to pick up on and become like a tea bag in the ocean. You start to pick up on this environment, and you're not picking up on it on the top, like, and thinking, oh, I'm analyzing this smell and, this is what it means kind of thing. It's not like that at all. It's using that language, it's listening to that language, and it's learning that language simply by listening to it being used by the trees, by the plants, by the animals.
So would a comparison being, if you were analysing it, being somebody who was an expert in, say, whiskey or wine, when they would smell and they would go, musty bookshelf smell and things like that?
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about... Absolutely, you're right. That's analysis, and I'm not saying that's not useful. But I'm not so sure about the wine, because that's more of a judgment. They're making a judgment based on a very holistic sense, aren't they? There's a lot of chemicals involved in that, in the smell of wine. And then they're making a judgment on holistic sense. What's going to be, the smell and the taste are linked together there, aren't they?
Well, the reason why I asked was like, I'm thinking, how could somebody start training on a very basic level their sense of smell?
Oh, we're going to do that in a minute, mate. We're going to do that in a minute. We'll get on that. So that's the technique. That's it. Yeah, that's the technique. Yeah. we'll come on to that in a second. What I was going to say, if you want to talk about that kind of example you've just given, let's talk about the real experts, right? They're currently training dogs so first of all, we said dogs have got a credible sense of smell. Dogs can sense chemicals in the air through their noses. They can sense chemicals in the air that are in concentrations as low as 1 part per trillion. That's how sensitive their smell is.
Wow.
Unbelievably sensitive, yeah. And they're training certain dogs to sniff out certain types of cancer cells. They give them samples from
this, yeah.
They give them samples from different people, test subjects. Some people have cancer, some people don't. And these dogs can identify which cells have the cancer. And these dogs can literally walk up to somebody and tell whether they have cancer or not. Certain types of cancer. It's not all types, because cancer is a complex thing, but certain types of cancer. Wow, talk about an amazing application of some fairly shamanic type of technique by dogs.
That's symbiosis again, isn't it?
Dog shamans, not human shamans in this case, but, wow. And talk about a really brilliant application of shamanic technique. There you go. Yeah. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Mm-hmm. So, and also, the other things, some work's going on at the moment. There's a lot of funding being pumped into malaria research. I believe Bill Gates has had a lot to do with that, the Microsoft billionaire. And they're also working on methods of early detection of malaria through the detection of chemicals in the breath. So, when the police breathalyze you for drink driving, the idea is they'll be able to breathalyze you for malaria long before any of the symptoms show. Yeah. So again, this kind of, and these are the same chemical smells, effectively. They could probably train dogs to do that as well. Yeah. In this case, they're using machinery to do it. I guess the machinery is a lot easier to reproduce. So I guess those dogs take a lot of training, a lot of practice. I don't like to call it training. Actually, it's a lot of practice before they're able to get good at that. And also, just in terms of things, when we say things come naturally to us and not naturally to us, like we said, there's this thing making shapes in the clouds, and we think it's natural to us, and maybe it isn't. Maybe it's conditioned into us. Smell is one of those places where you really know whether it comes natural to us or not, because that processing link is not there. You can, a horrible smell, you may be able to convince yourself that you think it smells nice, but, and this is from the very earliest age, you very young babies, if they smell a horrible smell, their face will screw up. And if they smell a nice smell, it sort of widens up and their eyebrows go up and they, start.
So this sense of good and bad is there without social conditioning. It's more nature rather than nurture.
Yeah. And that is obviously the evolutionary basis of that is these things that smell bad, they're probably not that good for you. Yeah. And the things that smell nice are good for you. Or there's more sophistication than that in this. If you want a language of smell that goes on in nature, there's more sophistication than that, because you could be being duped, There are certain types of plants, orchids, for instance, that release chemicals into the air that are not chemicals that are naturally released by plants. They're chemicals that are naturally released by bees. They're kind of sexual reproduction triggers, chemicals. And these bees go nuts for them. They go and try and mate with the orchid or mate with the flower. And of course, they're not mating with it; they're pollinating it. But so they're sort of being duped. They smell something they think is really, really nice, something they associate with sex, basically. And actually, it's some evil plant duping them, using this language to dupe them. So I hope that's kind of idea of how this stuff works within nature. It's when we talk about that top line. It's in a sense the top line, the creative element is the closest part to me. It's in the core of me. It's in the absolute center of my being. But once you start to understand shamanism, that center of your being is expansive. It's not insular. We make it insular. It's expansive. That center of my being is the center of the being of the entire universe, effectively. And this is, we're talking about the expansion theory of the universe, and when you have everything in the universe expanding out from a single point, from a singularity, you think about it in sort of scientific terms, every point in the universe is the center of the universe. So So funny story about a particular shaman in Japan. We won't mention them by name in case we upset anybody. But this particular shaman was asked where the center of the universe was, and the particular shaman had a bit of a sense of humor, and they wandered around a bit and pointed at the ground and said, "Oh, just here, yeah, put a marker here."
Up builds a temple.
That's right, because they could have picked any spot they wanted, you know. But this is the idea. So there's a shaman trying to teach them through a bit of humor and a bit of
Yeah, but look at what they left behind.
Yes, and now, you know, everybody's around that spot worshipping it, you know. It's funny, isn't it? You know, funny. There's a bit more to it than that. I'm simplifying a bit for the sense of humor, but, you know, the truth is they could pick, from a shamanistic point of view, they could have picked any spot they liked and said that was the center of the universe. Yeah. So, the point of origin of the universe. And on another podcast, we'll talk about that particular group. It's very interesting as well, but let's leave a gap so that nobody knows which group we're talking about, because it is quite an interesting group, that one. The originally shamanistic group.
I'm putting a pin in that and I'm writing it down. I'll just put interesting
let's do
group.
At least 5 or 6 episodes of a gap before we come back to it. Yeah. And so what I'm saying is, in terms of tapping into the center of you, the absolute core of you, your creative realm, your top line, you are at the same time tapping into the core of everything. And in shamanistic terms, everything is, as a matter of fact, interconnected. There's no separation. Separation to people, as you come on with shamanism, I mean, I don't mean just Joe, anybody who's practicing shamanism, as time goes by, things seem less and less and less separate to you. So we've talked about my attitude, my sort of negative attitude towards the martial arts. It's like putting things in little boxes, isn't it? Judo is different from karate, is different from tai chi, is different from, you know, something else. And actually they're not, you know, they're all the same stuff. They're just different ways, different emphasis on the same kind of stuff. And they're all the same thing. And, you know, and they're all the same thing as dancing, and they're all the same thing as living and working and, you know, it's all about interacting with other human beings, interacting with the world. And they all have an admittedly quite expansive set of underlying principles that are common to all of these disciplines, all these different things. And to me, they're just like somebody's. So when I view a martial art, for instance, I view it as somebody's packaged up a door in. It's not a thing that's, you know, like when people say which is the best martial art. This is a nonsense question. The bottom line is, you could take 2 different people who do exactly the same martial art, even the same style of the same martial art, and one of those guys will be a fantastically better martial artist than the other one, even though they do the same martial art. And you can take 2 guys from another martial art, and one of those guys will be a fantastically better martial artist than the other one. And quite often, you can take the fantastically better one from one martial art, and he'll be better than both of the not so great ones from both martial arts. And the fantastically better one from another martial art will be better than both the fantastic. Do you follow what I mean?
Yeah.
But of course, there's also spectrum there. You know, you do get that when you package up. So I see a martial art as like a tube that people go through in order to, it's like get in. It's like, you know, it's that door in the ball, isn't it? And I felt like, you know, doing more and more and more martial arts as I've done in my life, they become less and less important, you know. And so the question is, which, as I think I've said before, which one's the best? If I had time, I would do every martial art on this planet. If I could, you know, if I had time, and it's kind of frustrating to me that I can't. Yeah. And the only way that some martial arts seem to do better than others, that it tends to be in certain contexts. You know, for instance, no weapons involved. Then certain martial arts do better than others. Against people of the same sort of standard, one martial art will consistently win against another. That's more about scope. You know, quite. You know. We don't want to turn this into a martial arts podcast, but I'm going to draw an analogy with shamanism. So if you only ever practice boxing, say, you will be weak against somebody who spends their entire day rolling around on the ground grappling. You will be weak against somebody who does that, especially if that person can also box. Yeah. If you spend all your time grappling, rolling around on the ground, grappling and you never actually hit anyone, you will be very weak against somebody who you drag. You'll probably be able to get them down on the ground, but once you've got them down on the ground, they start pummeling you. If you've no experience of that, you're going to do badly. Yeah. So there's the scope thing. Yeah. And some martial arts have very narrow scope and therefore they don't do very well against other martial arts that have a very broad scope. Yeah. But that's not really what I'm talking about here. But the analogy I want to draw is with martial arts is in shamanism. This is the breadth versus depth thing. The advantage of something like smell is there's an enormous breadth there. We've said for flowers, 2,000 different chemicals, 400 different dimensions in how your nervous system deals with those smells, and the endocrine system, the chemical system within the body deal with those smells. 400 different dimensions times 2,000 different chemicals just for how you react to flowers. Yeah. You're getting a fantastic scope, the breadth. If you think about that, that's a martial art that does everything. It does every weapon known to man, spears and blades, and it's or in military terms, it's a whole carrier fleet. It's not just an aircraft carrier or destroyer or submarine. It's all of those things together. Yeah. So smell's absolutely fantastic for that scope thing, and so to the technique, shilshik. So it's an extension of techniques that we talked about. And unfortunately, you're not going to be able to do this unless you get to a natural environment, or maybe you can do it in a botanical garden or something like that. In a city, there's some really cute gardens or somewhere like that in London. There's somewhere like that you may be able to do this. But what I'd like you to do is find a place where you can walk for a long distance. Woods are good because trees are very good for this kind of thing. Trees, plants, and ideally, it would be ideal if you could find some mixed woodland, some woodland where there's lots of different kinds of plants. If you got one of these sort of, what we have in the UK, these forestry commission pine forests where there's nothing but Norwegian pine trees, row after row of them stretching away at the distance. Although those things smell amazing, it has to be said, but I'd prefer a variety of stuff. Mixed deciduous woodland, that's probably that's how a scientist or biologist might characterize the kind of environment I'm talking about. Woodland would be ideal. It doesn't have to be. If there's plenty of plants around and there's no trees, then you can still do this kind of thing. So what I want you to do is go there and practice. First of all, practice chillicity. Practice your chillicity while you're moving. You don't have to be running. We're not talking about the wild run or anything. Just while you're walking or wandering slowly through this forest. Take your time. No hurry. Just practice chillicity there. And over time, just gradually start to close your eyes. Don't close them to the point. Well, you can, if you get good at this, you can probably, if you practice this a lot and it becomes one of your main techniques, you can probably close them completely. Especially once you know the wood. I used to be able to do this. So the wood in the Ock Hills I used to go to, I used to be able to do this completely with my eyes closed. But we don't want you walking into trees. That's not the purpose of it. But when you slowly close your eyes, so you start looking through your lashes. Again, you're not thinking, I shouldn't have to tell you that by episode 30, should I? Yeah, so you know this already. You are not thinking. You're walking through that woodland. You gradually close your eyes. Yeah, just gradually. And so we talked about sensory deprivation. You're trying to reduce your sense of sight. And when you do that, I think as one of the guys asked on the question and answer session, your other senses get heightened. Your sense of hearing will become heightened, which is fine. That's not what we're looking at in this particular exercise. But your sense of smell will also become heightened. And what I want you to try and do is walk through the woodland, taking not too much notice of the plants and things that are around you. But when you feel a rich dialogue going on, then stop. Yeah. So you're walking along, you will, and in terms of what you experience in your everyday life, the first step you take if you're in an environment like that, you're going to feel a rich dialogue going on, dialogue of smell going on in that environment. You're walking along, and you will sense through smell, let's say pay lightweight attention to the smell, not cerebral cortex attention, limbic system attention. Just allow it to wash over you, allow it to, in a certain sense, not overwhelm you, but allow the smell to wash over you. and you'll find that it's rich, and you'll find a lot of different smells. And when you do this for a while, take your time, you practice this on multiple occasions, that, the 10th time you do this, you will notice orders of magnitude more stuff than the first time you practiced it. And I don't mean, when I say spend a lot of time practicing it, I don't mean one continuous session. I mean, maybe do it for half an hour one time, half an hour another time, an hour the next set, that kind of thing. As you go, you'll order orders of magnitude more and more stuff. And what I'd like you to do is find the places where there's a really rich, strong dialogue going on. There's a real richness in what's going on there. And then when you get to those places, stop and switch your chillicity. Don't start thinking, don't start analyzing it. Switch your chillicity back to vision, open your eyes, and just take in the scene through visual chillicity. Yeah, that unfocused Bura Chikhat Harate. There'll be a huge temptation to analyze it. Why has the dialogue stopped me at this point and not some other point? I don't want you to do that. Don't go there. Don't even think about that. Just leave it. Just when you stop, the dialogue, the intensity of the dialogue of smell brings you to a stop. This is Shilshik. It brings you to a stop. Switch from nose-based chillicity, if you like, to eye-based chillicity, taking the scene. And what'll happen is you do this. You don't try and learn anything on this, even the first 5 times you do it. Just do it. Don't try and have judgments. Don't say, I've stopped here because there's this particular bush, or, like I said, it may be the insects are attacking a tree and you've picked up on something like that, just like the insectivorous birds do. I don't want you to think about what it is that stopped you. Just allow a certain richness of the intensity to stop you of the smell. Yeah. And then do that a few times. And what I'm saying is this will give you a good example of how shamanic technique develops. Mm-hmm. Once you've done this 10, 20 times on 10, 20 different occasions, you will start to just know what it is that's stopping you. Yeah. You will start to know. You won't have to logicalize about it. You won't have to think about it in your brain, sit down and analyze, like Cluedo or something. Was it Professor Hamley in the dining room with the hammer? Not like that. You will just know, but you won't know if you do this right and you keep your baseline out of it. You will know in the midline and top line. You will know in the midline and top line what is stopping you. You won't be able to put it into words. In fact, if you can put it into words, then you're doing it wrong. Yeah. But you will know in a sense. And the reason I like this exercise, Shilshik, is that it really helps people to understand that shamanic way of knowing, that shamanic way of understanding things. That is actually, and what we're talking about here is an incredibly lightweight version of the spirit journey, an incredibly lightweight version of that. And so that's the technique. That's all there is to it. I guess other environments, I can imagine me doing this along the shore, especially if there's a lot of rock pools and seaweed and stuff like that, a lot of animals around, shore animals along the shore of the sea, do this kind of thing. But honestly, I'd be lying if I didn't say mixed woodland was the best environment to do this in. I've done this in I've done this in an awful lot of different environments, and mixed deciduous woodland is absolutely the best environment to do this in. It's that I've ever encountered. There may be another, I don't know. Yeah.
So it's about, well, I always do this and you always go, no, Joe. It's about shamanic awareness in a sense, because I remember like in stage 2, you were talking about extending the awareness from the drum outwards into the room.
Yes.
And to feel the environment kind of in that way. So
exactly. So this is a little bit further than that. This is extending out into the weave, the guruch, the weave. Yeah, you're extending yourself out into the weave through the one sense that gives you the best direct connect between your personal top line and the weave itself.
Yeah.
The one sense that helps you not do the baseline thing. Yeah. If you think about let me tell you just a little bit about how that works in biological terms. The air goes into your nose, okay? And there's the olfactory nerves are just there. They're there in the roof of your nose. And there's a very incredibly thin piece of bone. Incidentally, this is why the Egyptians used to do embalming. They used to get the brain out through the nose, because the thinnest part of your brain is at the top of your nose. It's got a crazy name. It's called the cribiform plate of ethmoid bone, or something like that in biology. Yeah. But it's just a thin bit of bone in the skull. And the reason it's thin is all about this direct connect. Those fibers stick straight through that bone. They stick straight through holes in that bone, and they go straight into the olfactory bulb. And the olfactory bulb has a direct connect to your limbic system and other parts of your. There's an olfactory tract, and it has a direct connect straight into your brain, but straight into the what people would call the lower functions of your brain, straight into the limbic system, straight into what we would call the top line. Yeah, describing that as the lower functions and the upper level of the higher functions. The very fact that we use those terms in biology shows our bias for the baseline, isn't it? All this old effective stuff that's in the brain, we don't want to talk about that. That's all animal impulses and that kind of thing.
Yeah, we've evolved
that's
past our animal
stuff,
impulses.
and now we have the higher stuff. I mean, it's physically higher in the brain by a few centimeters, but the, just the fact we use those terms. So when I say the lower centers of the brain, I'm saying it in a positive way, not a negative way. Yeah. And it's linked straight in there, and I'm not, like I said, I'm not pretending that there isn't a link to the neocortex as well. There is, but there is this direct, there's this direct connection from the olfactory bulb. Nerves go bang straight into the limbic system. That hits the hypothalamus, which we've said that's the bit that the limbic system, the top line, and the cortex, the baseline, was fighting over for control of, and that goes straight to the pituitary. So here you are, smell, bang, limbic system, bang, hypothalamus, bang, pituitary, chemicals released into your bloodstream. Yeah.
It's so
quite interesting.
It's so interesting as this, because you think about tigers, you think about lions, you think about wild animals out there, and that they are part of the environment, and they'll be doing this shit, but they won't be thinking about it. They won't be analyzing it. And we need this whole secret, if kind of these techniques to almost re-ground ourselves with what it means to be an animal in in our natural environment. So
absolutely. And think about this, some of those old movies, those nature is red and tooth and claw kind of movies where, they're stranded out in the wilderness and maybe they're being hunted by wolves, right? One of the really interesting things, I've done a lot of research on that. There are very few throughout the whole of human history, there are very, very few documented accounts of wolf attacks on humans. They're so vanishingly rare as to be, you could almost say that wolves don't attack humans. That's how rare they are. But, in the movies they do. And, and you can think in the movie that the hero is hiding behind a rock or he's climbed up a tree until the wolves go by. If you understand the reality of this stuff, we're talking about, wolves also can smell 1 part per trillion. They know which direction it's coming from, and they got like dogs, they got 300 million receptors in their noses. You're hiding from a pack of wolves. When you understand this stuff, how ridiculous that is. Just how ridiculous. They know where you are. They know exactly where you are. And the reason they don't attack you is they're not dumb. They're very intelligent animals. These animals know that, whether it's in their baseline or their top line, who knows? But, they know for whatever reason attacking humans is a really bloody bad idea.
In their animism. They'll know in their animism.
Absolutely, they know, because we are the most dangerous animal on the planet, and you do not attack the most dangerous animal on the planet. Yeah.
Well, on that note, should we wrap it up? I think that's brought us to the end. One last little question. I don't know whether you want to discuss this on a future... Well, it will be a future episode, or even discuss it at all. I remember you saying that there were certain... potions or things you can mix and to directly influence smell. Sure. Is that something you want to explore at a later date?
You will do it at a later date. Just to say that a little trick that I use, especially when I didn't have an awesome drum. We said it's nice to have a drum with a bit of a nice smell. And I didn't have a drum with a nice smell. I had these rubbishy drums I used to make myself. Is a little bit of essential oils to give it a nice smell. So rub a little bit. I actually use sandalwood, believe it or not. Which is crazy expensive. You don't have to use sandalwood. I just really like the smell of that stuff.
I do as well.
Rub a little bit of that inside the frame. Make sure you don't put it on the membrane though. It needs to go on the wood, not on the hide. Yeah.
Yeah.
Rub a little bit of that inside the frame every now and again, and that'll make the experience a good deal more pleasant. Help you with the link a little bit. Don't make out that this is magic or anything. It's not magic potion or anything. Just help a little bit. But if you've got a drum that smells great, don't do that.
My drum just smells of nothing. It just there's just absolutely nothing to it. It's not particularly.
But you think?
I mean, it's just an octagon.
Go out there, start practicing shield shake, and I'll bet you that if you practice, let's say you practice shield shake 10 times, and you start doing booking and hangray again, you will no longer say that the drum smells of nothing.
Good point. Yeah. Well, because it's starting to train that sense, isn't it? Because we don't train it. The average person doesn't train
unsuppress it.
Yeah.
Because we're conditioned. That's the mesmers. But it suppresses things, and one of the things it suppresses, it doesn't suppress or smell it. It suppresses the attention that we give to it, the value that we place on it. It's one of the most valuable things that we have.
I've found that because we are baseline heavy, being baseline heavy and analysing all the time, it often hides the more complex nature of things.
Exactly. We dumb things down to the point where we
dumb things down to the point where we can compute it in our brains. So it might be highly complex on the baseline, but it's still reductionist.
Remember, it's not the whole brain. It's that tiny little couple of millimeters thick layer on the surface of your brain. What about the rest of your brain, mate?
Okay, fantastic. So let's leave it there. Unless there's anything else you want to say?
No, that's good, mate. That's good.
Thanks a lot for listening, guys. I think that's been a great 30th episode. I've enjoyed it very much. It's been fascinating for me as well. All this is new to me. So go to wovenenergy.com /start-here for your get started episode. You can grab that now. If you are subscribed on iTunes or you're subscribed on any of the other podcast apps, please give us a rating. We would obviously prefer you give us a 5 out of 5, but give us whatever you feel we deserve. And hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you next episode.
Thanks a lot.